3 years of my life, gone just like that, and now I'm left picking up the pieces of a financial mess I never saw coming. Honestly, I need to get this out of my system before I completely lose it. I met Blake on a day that should have been completely uneventful. I was riding Amtrak to visit my sister in Chicago when our train hit something on the tracks. It didn't fully derail, but the damage to the undercarriage was enough to leave us stranded in the middle of nowhere, somewhere deep in Pennsylvania. They had to shuttle everyone by bus to this tiny town while they sorted everything out. We were stuck there for 8 hours. Yeah, 8 full hours in a one-stoplight town that had exactly one diner, one dive bar, and a half-stocked convenience store. Most of the passengers flooded the diner immediately, and it filled up quick. I ended up next door at the bar, dragging my overnight bag with me, ordering the saddest sandwich on the menu, and texting my sister to let her know I'd be arriving late. That's where I saw Blake. He was 2 stools away, also clearly not from around there, sitting with his own luggage. He cracked some joke about the universe forcing us to slow down and embrace small-town charm. I laughed. It was dumb, but it worked. He was attractive, tall with slightly messy dark blonde hair, and these really nice hands. I don't even know why, but I've always had a thing for good hands. We started chatting and, surprise, we were both heading to roughly the same area. He mentioned he had an interview lined up, said he was fed up with the whole corporate scene, and wanted to do something that actually mattered. I told him I worked in logistics, not exactly thrilling, but it paid the bills and gave me stability. After a few beers and a long conversation, we swapped numbers. I didn't expect anything serious to come out of it, honestly, but the next day, he actually texted, and when I got back from my sister's place, we grabbed coffee. That job interview, he mentioned? Total bust, but he wasn't worried, said he had another one lined up, then another and another. There was always something promising just around the corner, some big break just within reach. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, the job market's rough, and Blake had that easy charm that made excuses sound like hope. About 6 months in, his lease was about to expire. My apartment was bigger anyway. It was also closer to downtown, and since I was already covering most of our date nights, he kept saying money was just tight for now. It kind of made sense when he suggested moving in. That's when things began to shift. The first month, he chipped in for rent on time. Second month, it was a week late. By the third, he gave me this long story about a freelance check being delayed, but promised he'd pay double next month to make up for it. I didn't stress. I could handle the rent solo if I had to. It wasn't ideal, but I could make it work, and since Blake was home all day, networking and working on his portfolio, at least the place stayed clean and dinner was usually ready when I got back. I kept telling myself this was temporary. Then his reason started getting more creative. The startup he was consulting for had payroll issues. Some client hadn't sent a payment yet. The project's deadline got pushed. Always something just barely outside his control. Always a fix just within reach. Meanwhile, my savings were slowly draining. I picked up extra hours, even took on some weekend shifts doing inventory just to stay afloat. Blake would rub my shoulders when I came home dead tired and tell me I was incredible, that once he made it, he'd repay every penny and then some. My friend Ryan was the first to raise a red flag. We were getting coffee and I casually mentioned skipping a concert because I needed to save money. She just gave me this look and asked, "How long are you planning to sponsor Blake's lifestyle?" I got defensive, of course, told her we were a team, that every relationship has rough patches, that if the roles were reversed, he'd do the same for me, but that question had stuck with me. I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how often he'd swipe my Visa without checking in, how the grocery bill had doubled, yet the fridge felt emptier than ever, how he always seemed to afford new video games or drinks with his buddies, but somehow never had enough for the electric bill. One time, after my cousin got engaged, I casually brought up marriage. Nothing serious, just a comment. Blake looked at me like I'd asked him to walk a tightrope over a canyon. Said he wasn't ready, that marriage was a big deal, that what we had was great, and we shouldn't mess with it. I let it go. I wish I hadn't. Then, for a brief moment, things looked up. Blake started leaving the apartment more, said he was meeting with potential clients, attending networking events, reconnecting with old coworkers. He seemed motivated for once. Told me everything was finally falling into place, and I believed him. I wanted it to be true. Then came that Friday night. My friend M texted asking if I wanted to grab dinner with her and her boyfriend. Blake had already said he'd be at another one of those networking things, so I said sure. I got to the restaurant a little early. M was acting off, glancing at her phone, giving me these weird, pitying looks. When her boyfriend showed up, he jumped into talking about some tech event from the night before. And then he said it, just like that. Asked if Blake had enjoyed the open bar, said he'd seen him there with his fiancée. I must have gone pale, because suddenly no one was talking, and slowly pulled out her phone and started apologizing. She said she wasn't sure whether to say anything, but something she saw on Instagram that morning hadn't made sense. She handed me her phone. It was a profile I didn't recognize, a blonde woman named Mia. Her latest post was from last night. There were string lights, 2 champagne glasses, and a close-up of her hand, proudly showing off a diamond ring. The caption? I said, "Yes, ring, can't believe I get to marry my soulmate." I kept scrolling, post after post of her and Blake, pictures going back weeks. Captions like, "My man," and "Date night with the love of my life." One of the photos was at the beach. 2 weekends ago, the same weekend Blake told me he was visiting his parents upstate. That's when my stomach dropped. I excused myself from dinner, and R tried to stop me, but I told them I'd call later. I went straight home, didn't even take my shoes off, just sat on the couch and pulled up our shared credit card account on my phone, and there it was. Restaurant charges in places I'd never been, a downtown hotel room from 3 weeks ago, a $2,800 charge at a jewelry store from last week. That's when it hit me. He bought her ring with my money. I just sat there in silence, staring at my phone, scrolling through all the charges and photos, watching the sun disappear behind the buildings until the apartment was completely dark. At around 9, I heard the key turn in the lock. He walked in like it was any other evening, kicked off his shoes, tossed his keys on the counter, and headed straight for the fridge. Cracked open a beer that, of course, I had paid for. I looked at him and asked, "Where have you been?" He didn't even blink. "Networking," he said casually. "Meeting people, things are finally looking up." And then I asked him if he'd gotten engaged recently. You should have seen his face, first confusion, then this twisted little smirk, like he was almost proud, like he was impressed I'd figured it out. When I asked if he'd proposed to that blonde girl in the photos, he shrugged, just shrugged, and then he had the nerve to say, "Look, can we not do this right now? I don't owe you anything." I was shaking, absolutely shaking. My voice cracked as I yelled, "You used my money. You lived in my apartment, and you proposed to someone else?" I screamed it, loud enough that I'm sure the entire floor heard me. That's when he rolled his eyes, took another sip of beer, and dropped the line I can't stop replaying in my head. He said, "Come on, you really thought I'd give you a ring? You're the kind of girl guys settle for when they've failed." I didn't fail. I didn't think. My body moved before I even processed what I was doing. I slammed my fist into his chest. Hard. He stumbled back, beer spilling down his shirt, and before he could catch his balance, I slapped him, full force, across the face. A red mark bloomed immediately. I told him to get out. Now, to pack his crap and leave. He tried to argue, said I was being dramatic. I grabbed his backpack from the hook by the door and started shoving random things inside. His phone charger, t-shirts from the clean laundry pile. I threw it at him and said, "You have 5 minutes. If you're still here after that, I'm calling your new fiancée and telling her everything." That finally got him moving. He grabbed some things while muttering under his breath, said he'd be back for the rest later. I told him to contact the landlord because I wouldn't be opening the door again. He slammed it behind him, and the next morning I changed the locks, dropped whatever was left of his things into garbage bags, and left them next to the dumpster. I blocked his number, blocked his email, blocked every social account I could find, but that wasn't the end of it. When I went through my accounts more carefully, the truth hit me like a second betrayal. The damage wasn't just that ring or a few dinners. It was over $1,700 in the last 2 months alone. Subscriptions I never signed up for, restaurant charges I couldn't stomach, and the ring, the goddamn ring that wasn't even meant for me. I called the bank, desperate, but most of the charges were too old to dispute, and because I'd made the mistake of authorizing him on my card, they couldn't help much. That was 3 months ago, and what happened after that is a whole different disaster I'll save for another post. First update. First off, I didn't expect the response my post got. Thank you. Honestly, I thought I was just shouting into the void, but it turns out a lot of you have been through something similar, or worse, and your messages meant a lot. A bunch of you asked what happened after I kicked Blake out, so buckle up because that night? That wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a whole new kind of chaos. The night after I threw him out, I couldn't sleep, not even a little. I kept checking the door, even though I'd already deadbolted it twice. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed nonstop with texts from Blake. The tone was all over the place. First, he was furious, accusing me of humiliating him by dumping his stuff outside. Then he tried guilt, said we needed to talk like adults, and then came the desperation. I have nowhere to go. I didn't respond to a single one. Next morning, I called in sick. There was no way I could face work. I needed a full day to process and assess how deep this financial hole really went. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened every bank statement, every card bill, every transaction history I could find, with a notebook in front of me. I started writing it all down. And that's when the full picture came into focus, and it was worse than I thought. It wasn't just the $1,100 I initially noticed going back a few months. There were dozens of smaller charges, random purchases, subscription services I didn't recognize, apps, games, food delivery under names I didn't remember approving. He'd been bleeding me dry slowly, piece by piece. The total damage? $5,400. That's $5,400, on top of the rent I'd covered, on top of groceries, utilities, all of it. I called the credit card company again, this time with everything documented. The woman I spoke to was kind, but her hands were tied. Most of the charges were too old, and since Blake had been an authorized user, technically, they were valid. All they could do was remove him from the account and flag anything suspicious going forward. She suggested I file a police report if I wanted to go further. And I did think about it, seriously, but the idea of dragging this through the legal system? Of having to see his smug face in court and explain why I let him have access in the first place? I couldn't do it. I was already drained. I decided to eat the loss and move on. That afternoon, I called a locksmith. Cost me $170 I didn't have, but the idea of Blake still having access to my place? Unbearable. While the locksmith did his thing, I gathered up the rest of Blake's stuff, threw it all into garbage bags, his clothes, his stupid protein powder that had taken over my cabinets. I texted him once, just once, and said his things would be by the dumpster for 24 hours. After that, they were going to Goodwill. And like clockwork, as I was dragging the last bag out, he showed up, right on cue. He looked awful, unshaven, same clothes from the night before. For half a second, I wondered where he'd even slept, then remembered. That was no longer my problem. He tried to talk, said I didn't know the full story, said Mia wasn't what I thought, claimed he'd been planning to break it off. I didn't stop, just walked right past him, bags in hand, pretending he didn't exist. When he grabbed my arm to make me listen, I jerked away so hard I scraped my elbow on the brick wall. I looked him dead in the eye and told him if he laid a finger on me again, I'd call the police. That finally shut him up, but I could still feel his eyes boring into my back as I headed inside. 20 minutes later, the locksmith handed me my new keys, and for the first time in days, I could actually breathe inside my own apartment. The following week at work felt like a fog. I was barely sleeping, constantly on edge. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped. I kept messing up simple things, and my supervisor was quick to point out every mistake. By Friday, I'd clawed my way through the backlog of missed deadlines, but I was drained, barely functioning. Ryan, one of my coworkers, invited me out for drinks that night, said I needed to rejoin the land of the living. I told him I was too tired, but truthfully, I couldn't afford a drink, let alone a night out. That next Monday, my manager called me into her office. I thought it was about the inventory report I'd botched the week before. I was ready to apologize, maybe beg for a warning. But it was something else entirely, way worse. They were restructuring. My position was being cut. I sat there nodding like a robot while she handed me the papers. 2 weeks' notice, and a severance check that wouldn't even cover next month's rent. I didn't cry. I signed everything calmly, walked back to my desk like nothing had happened. Then I locked myself in the bathroom and sat in a stall having a silent panic attack for 20 minutes, trying not to pass out. That night, I called my mom. We're not close. She's in Florida with her second husband, and we maybe talk once a month, but I needed someone, some kind of parental reassurance that everything was going to be okay. She meant well, I think. Told me she was sorry, but also threw in a not-so-subtle, "You never should have let Blake move in without a ring," and suggested I come stay with them for a while. Back to Florida. Back to a pull-out couch and my stepdad's political rants. Yeah, no thanks. I spent those 2 final weeks at work applying to everything I could find, 73 job applications, 6 responses, all second-round interviews that never went anywhere. By the time I boxed at my desk, rejection emails were hitting my inbox faster than I could delete them. That first week of unemployment, I tried to stick to a schedule, wake up, apply to jobs, eat something cheap, apply to more jobs, go for a walk instead of turning on the heat, make dinner, watch free YouTube stuff, sleep, do it all over again. By week 2, my bank account was circling the drain. I canceled Netflix, stopped using hot water, ate mostly ramen and eggs. I called the electric company to set up a payment plan, called my landlord, and promised the rent would only be a few days late. He wasn't thrilled, but said he'd wait until the 15th before charging fees. The 15th came and went. I sold my nicest watch on eBay, listed clothes on Poshmark, tried to offload my TV on Facebook Marketplace, but all I got were insulting offers. Then my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, Blake. He must have gotten a new phone or was borrowing someone else's, said he needed to talk, that Mia found out about us and ended things, that he was sorry and wanted to explain. I blocked the number immediately, but it still shook me. Not because I cared, I didn't, but it reminded me how badly I'd failed, how completely I'd misjudged him. I let him into my home, my finances, my life, and all I'd ever been to him was a backup, a safety net, someone to use. By the end of the month, I was out of options. My landlord started leaving angry voicemails. My electricity got shut off for 2 full days before I scraped together enough to get it turned back on. I ate nothing but plain rice for 3 straight days. That's when I finally swallowed my pride and applied for assistance. The whole process was soul-crushing, forms asking for every detail of my financial life. Hours waiting in an overcrowded office. Then the kicker. They said I'd earned too much at my last job to qualify for emergency aid. They handed me a paper listing nearby food banks. The next morning, I went to one. I stood in line with my ID and proof of address, smiled and nodded as they handed me a box of dented cans and nearly stale bread. Got back on the bus carrying it all in my lap, feeling like everyone was staring, even though no one was. That night, an email showed up in my inbox. A warehouse was hiring temp workers for the holiday rush. The pay was awful, but it was work. I applied immediately, had a phone interview the next morning, started that Monday. It was brutal. 10-hour shifts, constantly on my feet, lifting heavy boxes, freezing in one section of the warehouse and sweating buckets in the next. My hands blistered. My back never stopped aching. I came home so exhausted I couldn't even think about job hunting. Still, I managed to pay part of the rent. Not all of it, but enough that my landlord gave me another extension, late fees included. Then one night, I came home and saw the eviction notice taped to my front door. I had 30 days to pay in full or leave. I sat on the kitchen floor holding that piece of paper, just staring. No tears left, just numb. Then came a knock. It was my neighbor. She'd seen the notice, heard me come in, asked if I was okay. I wasn't, not even close, but I told her I was fine. She lingered at the doorway, then asked if I was maybe looking for a roommate. Her cousin Naomi needed a place to crash for a few months, just until she could afford something on her own. If we split rent 3 ways, it might just work. I'd barely exchanged more than a few words with that neighbor before, but in that moment she felt like some kind of miracle. I didn't hesitate. I said yes on the spot. Naomi moved in 2 days later. She kept to herself, paid everything in cash up front, and never asked why dinner for me was often just a bowl of rice. We didn't exactly become friends, but we lived around each other without issues in that increasingly bleak apartment. Thanks to her share of the rent, I finally paid off enough of what I owed to stop the eviction. I was still buried under credit card balances, still clinging to a job that barely paid more than minimum wage, still surviving on meals that looked like something out of a college dorm during finals week. But I had a roof over my head, and at that point, that was something. Then one morning, about 3 months after I'd thrown Blake out, I was rushing to catch my bus when I ran smack into someone on the sidewalk. I stumbled back, muttering an apology, not even glancing up. Then I heard my name. It was Blake, standing there like he'd been waiting. He was wearing a fast food uniform, one of those awful polos with the matching visor. I tried to sidestep him, but he blocked me, saying he'd been trying to reach me, that he needed to explain, that he'd made a terrible mistake. I noticed his phone was ancient now, nowhere near the shiny new iPhones he used to carry. Karma must have finally caught up to him. I told him I was late and walked straight past. He called after me, swearing he'd fix things, that he'd make it right. I didn't turn around. I sprinted for the bus and caught it just as the doors started to close. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I wanted him back or missed him, but because I was terrified he knew where I lived, that he might show up. I dragged a chair under the bedroom doorknob, even though I knew how irrational that was. The next morning, I opened the mailbox and found a letter. No stamp, just my name scribbled across the envelope. I knew that handwriting instantly. I didn't even open it, just ripped it into pieces and dropped each one into a different trash bin on the way to the bus stop. But I had a feeling this wasn't the end of it. And I was right. Second update. And thank you for all the kind messages. Reading your comments on the bus has honestly been one of the only things keeping me sane lately. A few of you asked what happened once Blake started popping up again, so here goes. After tearing up that letter, I hoped maybe he'd finally get the message. He didn't. Over the next 2 weeks. I kept spotting him, across the street from my building, near the bus stop, by work, even once at the laundromat I started going to because our building's machines were way too expensive. He never came right up to me, just stood there, watching, sometimes waving like we were old friends or something. I pretended not to notice him, walked faster, ignored the chill crawling up my spine. Meanwhile, the warehouse job that had seemed like a lifeline turned into something out of a bad dream. They started extending shifts without warning, so I'd clock in thinking it'd be an 8-hour day and end up staying 12. My feet were constantly swollen, and I developed this stabbing pain in my lower back that never went away. But I couldn't afford to stop, so I kept swallowing whatever expired ibuprofen I could dig up and push through. Naomi noticed one night I came home and couldn't even stand upright. She was making soup, something simple, and handed me a bowl without saying anything. It was the first real meal I'd had in weeks that didn't come out of a plastic wrapper. We sat at the kitchen table and, for the first time, actually talked. Turned out Naomi had her own version of a Blake, different guy, same brand of manipulation. It was oddly comforting, hearing her story, like I wasn't the only fool who fell for the wrong person. We started eating dinner together when our work schedules overlapped, just whatever we could pull together from the discount aisle or food bank stuff. It wasn't fancy, but it made the nights feel less heavy. Then one morning in late November, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My throat was raw, my head was pounding, and even getting out of bed felt impossible. I called work, my voice barely a whisper, as I explained. My supervisor gave me the usual reminder that temp jobs don't come with sick days. If I didn't show, my spot might not be there when I felt better. I dragged myself to the bathroom and found an old thermometer buried in the medicine cabinet. 103.5. That couldn't be right. I shook it and tried again. 103.8. I should have gone to urgent care. I know that now, but I had exactly $27 left in my account and still days to go before payday, so I took more ibuprofen, layered up in every sweater I owned, and somehow made it onto the bus. The day's a blur. I scanned boxes, drank from the water fountain, hid in the bathroom whenever I got too dizzy. I somehow finished the shift. I remember waiting for the bus afterward, soaked in sweat but still shaking. Next thing I knew, I was on the pavement. A teenage girl was crouched beside me, her eyes wide with panic. I'd passed out at the bus stop. She helped me sit up and asked if she should call someone. I told her no. That I was fine, just tired. It was a lie. I wasn't even close to fine, but I made it onto the bus, made it home somehow. I barely made it up the stairs, dragging myself one shaky step at a time, and basically collapsed the second I reached our apartment. Coat still on, boots still laced. I crumpled to the floor of the living room. That's how Naomi found me when she got home from her shift. Later, she told me she'd thought I was already gone. I was ghost pale, barely breathing. Somehow, she managed to get me into bed, got some water down my throat, and spent the entire night rotating cool washcloths on my forehead. When the sun came up, the fever had finally broken, but I felt like I'd been flattened by a freight train. Twice. Naomi had already called my job by then. Told them I had pneumonia and wouldn't be coming in for the rest of the week. I tried to argue with her, told her I couldn't afford to miss even one shift. She wasn't having it, shut me down fast, said no paycheck was worth ending up in a hospital bed, or worse. And she wasn't wrong, but being right doesn't pay utilities or buy groceries. I spent the next couple days mostly unconscious, surfacing just long enough to worry about money before drifting off again. On the third day, my phone rang. It was someone from the warehouse. I braced myself to get fired. But instead, the HR rep was calling to check on my condition and to inform me about their short-term disability policy. Turns out Naomi hadn't just called in for me. She'd actually gone down there in person, marched straight into the office, and demanded they explain their benefits. She raised enough hell that they finally bothered to look at their own rules and realized even temp workers were entitled to some basic coverage. I got 5 paid sick days, just 5. Not enough to bounce all the way back, but enough to keep me off the pavement outside another bus stop. That night, when she got home, I cried. Really cried. No one had gone to bat for me like that in I don't even know how long. When I finally returned to the warehouse, everything felt different. My supervisor kept giving me wary looks, probably afraid I was about to drop again. But the other workers, the ones I'd barely talked to before, they started checking in on me, reminding me to take breaks, even helping lift the heavier stuff. Word had apparently gotten out about the roommate who marched into HR like a one-woman protest. Meanwhile, the Blake situation started shifting. I stopped seeing him lurking around, but the text messages ramped up. He was clearly using different phones or borrowing them because every few days I get these long, dramatic messages from new numbers, apologies, regrets, blaming Mia, talking about how he'd lost everything. I blocked every number, one after another, but it was like swatting flies. You knew more were coming. Ryan suggested changing my number altogether, but even that came with a fee I couldn't afford at the time. So I kept blocking and moving on. When December hit, things got tighter financially. The warehouse was slammed with holiday orders. That meant more hours, which meant more money, but also more wear and tear on my body. My back pain hit a new level. I was taking the maximum dose of ibuprofen every single day just to get through work, and my teeth. God, the aching was constant. One molar in particular had been bugging me for months. Dental care might as well have been a trip to Paris with how out of reach it was. One freezing morning, while I waited for the bus, stamping my feet to keep blood flowing, an older woman next to me started chatting. Just typical stuff. How late the bus was, how cold it had gotten overnight. She mentioned she worked at a medical office just down the block. I nodded, mostly zoning out, until she casually said something about how their warehouse space needed reorganization. I must have looked completely desperate because I immediately asked if they were hiring. She blinked, kind of surprised, but gave me the office manager's name and told me to drop off a resume if I was serious. That evening, I dusted off my sad little resume, made some edits, and printed it out at the library. Next day during my lunch break, I walked into that medical office and asked for the manager by name. I fully expected to get the usual: apply online or leave it at the front desk. Instead, they brought me right in. The office manager was sitting behind a desk eating a sandwich. She skimmed my resume, asked about my logistics background, then asked when I could start. No formal interview, no hoops to jump through. It wasn't a full-time job, just 20 hours a week to help with inventory and supply deliveries, but it paid $3 more per hour than the warehouse, had flexible hours, and didn't require me to destroy my body just to get through the day. I said yes immediately. For the next few weeks, I juggled both jobs, mornings at the medical office, evenings back at the warehouse. I was dead on my feet most days, but for once, I could actually pay every bill that came in on time. Naomi started cooking more often. Usually for both of us. She didn't say anything about it, but I think she noticed how run down I looked. I'd come home, eat whatever she made, and then crash face first into bed. By the middle of January, I'd saved enough to walk away from the warehouse job. Turning in my badge felt like a victory. My supervisor looked like she couldn't believe I was really leaving. One of my coworkers even gave me an awkward hug and told me she was glad I got out. The medical office job wasn't glamorous, but it was consistent. The manager kept increasing my hours whenever she could, and eventually I was up to 35 hours a week. She even gave me a tiny desk in the back, so I could keep track of the inventory using their ancient desktop computer. With regular income finally rolling in, I started chipping away at the debt Blake had buried me in. $20 here, 50 there, small payments, but they made a dent. Watching those numbers go down gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. Naomi and I found a rhythm. We weren't exactly BFFs, but there was an unspoken respect between us. She'd started dating a quiet, decent guy who sometimes joined us for dinner. It was weirdly comforting, just having someone in the apartment who didn't remind me of everything I'd lost. Things were finally starting to turn around, little by little. My back still ached, my tooth still flared up now and then, but I was managing one careful step at a time. Then came Valentine's Day. I'd been purposely ignoring the sea of heart-shaped decorations in every store, the endless sappy ads, the couples making dinner plans. Naomi had plans with her boyfriend, which meant I had the apartment to myself. My thrilling agenda? A frozen pizza and whatever new release Netflix had queued up. I was halfway through a lukewarm slice of mediocrity when someone started knocking at the door. Not just knocking, pounding, urgent, frantic knocking. I froze. Pizza Madère. Who else could it be? That kind of drama had Blake written all over it. I crept to the door and peeked through the peephole. Yep, there he was, holding what looked like a bunch of flowers and a small gift box. I backed away instantly, hoping he'd think I wasn't home. He knocked again, called my name, said he could see the light under the door, that he just wanted a few minutes, that he needed to explain, to fix things. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt, but I stayed completely silent. Eventually, I heard him sigh. Something hit the floor, probably the flowers. Then the sound of footsteps fading down the hall. Once I was sure he was gone, I opened the door a crack. There on the floor sat a slightly crushed bouquet of grocery store roses, a velvet ring box, and a folded card. I should have left it all there, should have kicked it into the hallway and shut the door. But no, I had to know. I picked up the box first. Inside was a silver ring, modest, with a tiny stone, probably cubic zirconia, not diamond. The card read, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try and make things right. This is the ring I should have given you, not her. I've changed, please call me And standing there with that card in my hand, I felt absolutely nothing. No rage, no sadness, not even the bitter taste of resentment. Just numbness, like he was a memory I'd already buried. A man who burned my life to the ground and thought a bargain bin ring would somehow rebuild it. I dropped the card and the box into the trash next to the elevator, left the roses behind for someone else, and went back inside to finish my now cold pizza. The next morning, another text from another unknown number, Blake again, asking if I got his gift. I didn't just block him. I answered this time. 2 words, move on. Then I blocked the number. February slipped into March. Work at the medical office kept growing, more hours, more responsibility. I paid off a small credit card. Naomi and I painted the living room one Sunday, covering the depressing beige with a soft gray that somehow made everything feel a little cleaner, a little lighter. Even my mom noticed the difference in my voice when she called. She offered to help with dental costs if I came for a weekend visit. I was hesitant. My stepdad and I had a tense history, but the chance to deal with my aching molar was tempting. As for Blake, the texts finally stopped. No more unexpected run-ins, no more drama. I peeked at Mia's Instagram occasionally. She had clearly moved on, new boyfriend, new captions. Blake's account? Dormant, silent. I was rebuilding my life. Slowly, painfully, but steadily. I wasn't returning to the person I was before. I don't think I ever will. But I was becoming someone else. Someone steadier, someone smarter. Final update. Life carried on. My hours went full-time at the clinic, complete with actual benefits. I visited my mom, got that tooth taken care of. Naomi officially moved in with her boyfriend, and I found a new roommate through someone at work, a quiet grad student who pays rent early and doesn't steal my leftovers. My credit score inched upward. I began setting a little aside each month in a tiny, precious emergency fund. I even went on a couple of dates, nothing serious. Trust comes back slow after it's been shattered, but I was trying. I was open to the idea that not everyone would hurt me. Then last month, Ryan texted me. She'd bumped into Blake at a coffee shop, said he looked better, asked about me in a calm, respectful way, said he was moving to Pittsburgh to start fresh. I thanked her, but didn't give it much thought. Honestly, Blake relocating sounded like the healthiest thing he could do for both of us, which is why I was completely caught off guard when I opened my apartment door last week and saw him standing there, holding a small gift bag. My gut reaction? Slam the door and deadbolt it. But he didn't look like that Blake anymore. He looked normal, clean, healthier, his clothes fit, his hair was combed, his face wasn't haggard. He raised both hands like he was trying to show he came in peace, said he wasn't staying, that he was on his way out of town, and just wanted to leave something with me. I hesitated but took the bag. Inside was an envelope and a small box. The envelope contained $1,500 in cash. The box held the ring. The one from that Instagram post, the one he bought for Mia using my money, the one that triggered the whole spiral. He explained that Mia had thrown it at him when she left. He meant to pawn it but never did. Now, he said it belonged to me. Technically always had, and I could decide what to do with it. Keep it, sell it, toss it off a bridge, whatever. He said he had a job lined up in Pittsburgh and planned to send more payments, little by little, until he'd repaid what he owed. He said he was truly sorry, not just for the betrayal, but for the vile things he said when I caught him, said I deserved better, and hoped I'd found it, or would someday. Then he left. No speech, no plea, just a wave, and he was gone. The next day, I brought the ring to a jeweler. It was worth far less than he'd paid. Small stone, mass-produced setting. Still, I got just under $1,000 for it, deposited it straight into savings. So, that's the end of the Blake story. These days, I'm doing all right. The clinic gave me a small raise. I'm stable, I'm safe. My new roommate is easy to live with. My back still complains when it rains. A permanent reminder of those warehouse days. I still double-check the locks at night. But I'm building something new, something real. I don't know if Blake will keep his word. Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. But I've stopped shaping my life around other people's apologies or promises. If you followed this whole journey, thank you. Really, your kind words got me through some of the worst nights. I don't think I'll post about this again. This chapter is finally over. And I'm finally free.